So in all of the discussion about this movie, Father Malone, because we talked about, talking about this movie several times.
Yes.
It never came up that this was a Stephen King thing. I didn't know that Stephen King was involved until I watched the movie for the first time.
Oh my God. My first interest in the movie was because Stephen King was involved. So I just assumed when you said Silver Bullet that you just thought Stephen King's Silver Bullet.
Nope. I thought Silver Bullet. And then to track with that, one El Goro, a new co-host to the show from the Talk Without Rhythm podcast, goes and reads the short story today, best I can tell.
Yes, I did. I figured I'd come in prepared, and like you said, it's a very short story, and half of it is Bernie Wrightson illustrations, which are excellent, by the way. It's worth picking up only for the Bernie Wrightson illustrations alone, though the story itself is very fun.
So on this episode of the Kulturecast, I am still your host, Chris Dashi, much to the chagrin of many, and I am joined by the host of the Astounding Tales from the Public Domain, a newly launched show over at the Weirding Way Media Podcast Network, your friend and mine, Father Malone.
Jesus, Palomino. Just wanted to say that. That's one of my favorite lines.
Did you ad-lib that?
No, yeah, right. He absolutely did.
But did you come up with that on the fly? It was so creative. Yes, add that and cocaine. And also, like I had mentioned, joining us from the Talk Without Rhythm podcast, he is a newcomer to this show, but like I mentioned to him before I started recording, he was on the first episode of a little show that you may have heard of called The Projection Booth. First time I ever heard it, your friend and mine, El Goro.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I would try to throw out a Buseyism ad lib, but nobody can approach Busey, so I'm just going to let it be.
And to be fair, I think in 2022, no one should approach Busey, but that's a different story. He's lost it, right? I mean, I don't know if he ever had it.
Well, I assume he had it at one point, but certainly that motorcycle accident that happened in 1988 definitely changed some things, but he's still going. It's in a altered state, but that's Gary Busey for you.
Yeah.
But this period of Gary Busey, the mid 80s Gary Busey, is my sort of sweet spot for Gary Busey when he's unhinged but not untethered.
Exactly.
Like, after 88, it's all just wackiness. Here, he's still a real human being. And in this role in particular might be my favorite performance of Gary Busey.
Yeah, it definitely shines through from bit to bit. The idea that, yes, it's still, there's that elements of unhinged Busey that some people may be more familiar with him, but there's still the humanity there. There's still a warmth to him there. There's, dare I say, even a layering to his performance in this.
So what film are we talking about? Well, like I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be talking about Stephen King's Silver Bullet, unbeknownst to me, from 1985.
It began in May. And every month after that, whenever the moon was full, it happened again. And again.
What was that? It's over there. Don't point that at me.
Nobody knew who or what was responsible.
Come on.
They only knew it had to be stopped. Now, from the master of mystery and suspense, Stephen King's Silver Bullet. Silver Bullet, the last glimmering hope.
So it is directed by Dan Attias. It is written by Stephen King, based on Cycle of the Werewolf, a Stephen King short story. And it stars the aforementioned Gary Busey, Everett McGill, and Corey Haim. Corey Haim plays a boy in a wheelchair who finds out that there may be a werewolf hanging out in his neck of the woods being a sleepy little town called Tarker's Mill, Maine. Of course, it's in Maine. It's a Stephen King story. And the story progresses from there. We meet his crazy uncle, played by Gary Busey, a local preacher with a secret, played by the one and only Everett McGill. At one point, he looks like his well, his beau from Twin Peaks, we'll get to that, and one of my favorite actors of all time, Howard Hughes himself, Terry O'Quinn. So, El Goro, since you are the newcomer to the show, tell me a little bit about your time with Silver Bullet, the first time you saw it, your thoughts on the short story, and what you thought about watching it for the Kulturecast.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that you didn't know the Stephen King connection to this, because it was through Stephen King that I discovered Silver Bullet. I first read the novella of Cycle of the Werewolf when I was a teenager, and yet for whatever reason, I didn't get into actually seeing Silver Bullet until I was in my 20s. And looking at it from there were parts of it that did not hit the tone of the novella that I enjoyed, but still the overall charm of the film was enough to kind of see me through. The aforementioned performance of Gary Busey, a very young Corey Haim in this one as well. There's some questionable werewolf effects, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later, but for the most part, it's an enjoyable werewolf movie, which is not something you can regularly say. Of all the classic monsters, I hold the werewolf with the most affection, and which makes it very, very difficult for me, because there's not a whole hell of a lot of good werewolf movies out there. So I'm content with when films can merely be okay, and I think Silver Bullet certainly qualifies and actually becomes good. Can it stand up to, the 1-2 punch of 80s werewolf films that was An American Werewolf in London and The Howling? No, but it's perfectly fun for what it is.
Father Malone, same question to you, and addendum, your favorite Universal monster, given that we're talking about, Universal monsters, just not in the traditional Universal monster movies this month.
Okay. My first sort of experience with Silver Bullet, I saw it in the theater opening night. The trade paperback that came out with Bernie Wrightson's illustrations, which I'm going to echo El Goro here, they're spectacular. Even though Bernie Wrightson himself felt his depiction of the werewolf was lacking, his artwork is fantastic. There's one panel in particular when you see that the reveal of the priest as the werewolf, and it takes place on Halloween in the book. And it's a drawing from behind Marty, who's wearing a Yoda mask, and Reverend Lowe is just in front of him with just kind of a schlubby guy, but an eye patch on. It is a fantastic illustration. I would hang it on my wall right now. Anyway, so the book came out in '85, but I had a lot of older nerdy and horror friends and acquaintances. So somebody actually had the book. Was initially published as a hardcover in '83. So that's when I first read the book. And so I was waiting for the movie for 2 years, basically. So saw it. I was 12 years old and the lead character is 12 years old. So it was hard not to love the movie. But at the same time, the werewolf in the movie is fucking horrific. It's really, really bad.
Horrific in a bad way. We should clarify here.
Yeah. Right.
Please
this isn't
clarify.
This isn't the Hellhound from An American Werewolf in London. This isn't horrifying in your soul. This is a horrifying botched job that they're trying to pass off as cinema for their werewolf in this movie. Having said that, they cleverly or necessity demanded that they not show the thing a whole lot, and because just the hint of it is enough. Because I really like the story going on here. I believe all of these characters, particularly Uncle Red. Everyone needs an Uncle Red in their life if they don't have one, and this is the one I wished I had. It's a fun little movie, and it's a pretty good entry into the werewolf canon, because there are a lot of dogs, no pun intended, in it. Like you said, El Goro, they're few and far between when they're really good. Like that, this is good and doesn't feel insulting. Makes it a watch for me,
So again, I just looking through a list of things, saw Silver Bullet. Again, like you have both mentioned, werewolf movies are for the most part not great. I mean, again, I think you can name on one hand the good ones, and those might even be contentious at best. I think there's one or two really good ones that everybody can agree on. One of them being, like you just mentioned, Father Malone, American Werewolf in London. So again, I don't have an affinity for werewolves. My Universal monster of choice is the Mummy, which has his own problems, frankly, obviously, as we've seen recently, unfortunately. So all that out of the way, going into this, seeing Stephen King's name on it, just seeing everything about it while, again, just sitting and kind of enjoying it completely cold. It's okay. It's fun. It's not gonna make you say this is the greatest werewolf movie I've ever seen, and it's not gonna make you say this is the worst werewolf movie I've ever seen. It is good, but the werewolf effect oh man, it's what's fucked up is if you read about it, they try to claim that it was intentional. And Stephen King is, I like the design. This was when Stephen King was writing It, right? So there was a shitload of cocaine being kicked around.
It was Stephen King in the 80s. There was nothing but cocaine.
Right. So this is a great design. Steve, you're looking at the wall. Oh, yeah, werewolves. Like, yeah.
I'll say this. This is right around the creep show time. So he's writing and starring in that movie and writing this at the same time and suddenly collaborating with Bernie Wrightson, who he's admired for years. So yeah, he's way into the coke pocket, but not the too excessive coke pocket that would become It. This is good Stephen King.
It's not 1,400 pages of clowns. And again, I read It earlier this year. It's a fine book, but not everything needs to be 1,400 pages.
Now, if you want peak cocaine Stephen King, that's definitely Tommyknockers. Read that one. That's just insane.
Okay, yes, but that's the excess I was referring to. Like Tommyknockers is when he's just tapping at the keyboard and has no idea what he's writing, you know?
But, again, outside of kind of the missteps with some of the design choices, I think Gary Busey more or less carries the movie.
I would say so,
right?
Along with Corey Haim as well. And I think one of the things that kind of holds this film back is that it's a film of two very different tones. And one of the things I was reading about it is that sort of tonal disconnect came from conflicts between Dino De Laurentiis, who was the producer on this, who was all pushing the gore. He wanted this to be an extreme horror film. And then you had Dan Attias, who was making his feature film debut, and to the best of my knowledge, has never directed a film after this. He's been primarily a TV guy for the majority of his career. He was really drawn to sort of the family-friendly dynamics. So you have these very kind of sweet family scenes, and then boom, it transitions into the gore. Now, a good filmmaker that is equally invested in both can balance those two things and create an interesting sort of tonal juxtaposition between the two. I get the sense that Attias didn't really like the gorier stuff, and so it just feels kind of out of place with the majority of the tone of the rest of the film.
Well, there's some moments in this movie that are oddly comedic. Like the werewolf picking up a baseball bat and beating someone to death with it, which I can only assume is meant to be comedic in a movie that, like you just mentioned, is tonally inconsistent throughout to a point where I can't tell if it's supposed to be comedic. And that's the problem. Because again, I was laughing. There's a werewolf beating someone to death with a baseball bat, which you don't see for the most part, but yet
you don't see enough, actually. Let's face it.
Yeah,
and
really.
We get it twice in this movie.
Yeah, that's fair.
He kills two people with a baseball.
Oh, yeah, poor Terry O'Quinn getting it. Just getting brutalized.
That effect was good in that scene. The bashing of the head and Terry O'Quinn selling it really hard. Like those effects were good. But the thing wielding the bat is an issue.
Which is interesting because when you look at the people behind it, it was Carlo Rambaldi, and he is a tremendously talented creature effects guy. And you can see the craft, particularly in some of the transformation sequences. Well, again, they don't necessarily have that same sort of visual punch of what there was in An American Werewolf in London. There's still some interesting effects at play within this film. It's the final sculpt that I really have issues with. Ignoring the body, because it's very difficult to pull off, the body of a werewolf. It's the final sculpt of the head that makes it basically look like a bear.
Right, like a black
bear.
Yeah, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't appear threatening, and at certain points it almost feels a little too human, which may have been reflected from an earlier draft of the script where the werewolf was actually supposed to talk.
Yeah, that was going to be the big innovation.
Yep.
And then they were like, oh no, we're never going to be able to do that. Yeah, the skull, the end skull, you mentioned Carlo Rambaldi. He is fantastically talented. In fact, there's another Stephen King adaptation produced by Dino De Laurentiis called Cat's Eye, an anthology film. And they have this troll that is menacing Drew Barrymore at the end of the movie and a cat fighting it. That creature is fantastic. It's it walked out of a nightmare, but in a good way. So it makes this thing like triply disappointing. It's just, anyway, I'm going to stop beating on the effects of it, but they are bad.
Well, and it may seem, like beating that dead horse, but more so than almost any other monster, a werewolf and the efficacy of werewolf is based upon how well you can pull off that effect. With a vampire narrative, with a zombie, they not as big of a heavy lift in terms of the makeup department. A werewolf lives and dies by its design, and it didn't quite hit it. It came close. I mean, I appreciate the fact that it's a bipedal werewolf. That's always my preferred approach, but it does not look great.
Well, it doesn't look great. And then when they show it, it doesn't do anything. It's just standing there.
Yeah.
It's just, he's just, looking around or getting a bottle rocket in his eye. That's it. I mean, it's not even doing anything interesting other than beating Terry O'Quinn over the head with a baseball bat. A lot of it is the Jaws approach. Show very little in Jaws. It was used to successful effect. Here it's used to just, when you see the creature, you understand why they weren't showing it. That's what happens in one of these movies, right? It's either you're not showing it because it's really effective and you didn't want to blow your load 10 minutes in, or you're trying to cover up the fact that this creature looks like absolute like shit, just a turd covered with hair. And it's so hard to even distinguish its features, which I think for me is the biggest failure. The biggest failure is it just looks very muddy as a creature design. There's, it has the protruding snout. Yeah, it has red eyes, but it's just not a compelling design beyond that. It just kind of looks.
I think the one scene where the werewolf is actually terrifically menacing is the scene on the bridge. And it's just Everett McGill threatening Corey Haim.
Right.
Like, holy God. You know what? In retrospect, looking at that scene, if they just put a little bit of hair on his face and sharp teeth and said, this is our werewolf, that would have solved all the problems. Because Everett McGill can do no wrong.
The Jack Nicholson approach in Wolf.
Yeah. Like, I would have bought it. Like, this needn't have been a big effects movie. They could still get gallons of blood. But at this movie's heart, it's this brother and sister, coming together over this shared trauma and their, uncle. And I don't know. I think it's actually like a sweet family story, which is why the movie works. And we haven't mentioned, is it Megan Follows, right? As Jane?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think she does a fantastic job in this. And, we were harping upon the lack of craftsmanship in the execution of the special effects. But in terms of filmmaking, I do think that Dan Attias actually had some wonderful sequences. One of my favorites was actually a Megan Follows sequence where she's going throughout the town trying to find the person with the missing eye. Just the way that scene plays out with these kind of close-ups on different faces as she's looking for the eye, combined with that music from Jay Chataway. There was a very strong unsettling vibe to the entire thing. And it was nothing more than just a sequence of faces. But the way that it plays out, the way it's allowed to kind of go at its own sort of pace, it creates such a tone, such an atmosphere that, again, I have to attribute that to the filmmaking of Dan Attias. I think he handled those sequences fantastically.
Yeah, and I should point out that that's also Stephen King rewriting himself for the better, because in the novella, it's just Marty's going out on trick-or-treating on Halloween and just happens to notice that Reverend Lowe doesn't have an eye. Whereas this gives Jane's purpose. And it's one of the best sequences in the movie where she's actually investigating on the behalf of Marty, already on his side, which I will also say Megan Follows has another scene in the movie early on when her little brother and his older dickhead friend play a prank on her by dropping a snake on her. And
she Brady, you dick.
Yeah. And she falls into the mud. Megan Follows the torment that she displays, that scene bothers me so much that when I was rewatching the film last night, I actually fast forwarded through it. Like that to me is maybe the most effective scene of the movie. It's the most real, certainly.
And it was, as you mentioned, a great sort of expansion from Stephen King, him improving upon the novella, which was, a little bit threadbare just by dint of its construction. And for you, Chris, the kind of the benefit of, or the to tell you how the novella was constructed, it started its life originally as a calendar project. Yeah. Where Stephen King was supposed to write just these little blurb things for a calendar, and then he just overwrote it and turned it into a novella. So the structure of it is it goes by month. Every month there's a new attack. And as such, we don't get introduced to the character of Marty until like halfway through the year. And his sister in that, who I believe is named Kate, she is not a character whatsoever. She'll show up and basically bag on Marty for being a cripple that always gets his own way. And then that's about it. So King, by necessity, had to boost up her character to make it a more cohesive sort of story, to focus the action on this sort of family dynamic.
That for me, I think is, excuse me, that for me is one of the things I wish there had been more of. I wish there had been, and again, like you mentioned, Father Malone, it's a family movie. It's you could even make the case it's kind of Spielberg adjacent in a lot of ways. Sure. They're not as messed up as a Spielbergian family, but because there is a mom, there is a dad, and it's just the uncle that seems to be kind of the Yahoo of the group. But I think it would have benefited from a decision on style throughout. And I think it would have benefited from just maybe going more into kind of the heightened reality fairy tale almost, because they could have gone that way, right? I mean, it's kind of there. It's kind of a fairy tale adjacent. I mean, again, none of our main characters die. They're not, they're put in harm's way, but ultimately at the end of the story, everything turns out fine for everybody. Everybody learns a lesson. You should believe people when they're talking. But I think the family stuff for me was the stuff that worked the most in the movie. Primarily because, again, like you've mentioned, El Goro and Father Malone, the quality of the actors in this movie is not the same as the quality of the effects. The actors outshine the effects. They're in a better movie than the effects are pretending to be in.
Well, and it's interesting you bring up the idea of wanting it to be sort of more of a heightened reality, because in an alternate world, we would have possibly gotten something closer to that, because the first attached director to this was Don Coscarelli.
Right.
And then eventually got dropped from the project. And you could easily see him sinking his teeth, pun very much intended, into this sort of material, because even ignoring the rest of the family dynamic stuff, this is a boy's adventure story. It's Corey Haim terrassing around on a souped up wheelchair, motorcycle, tricycle thing. How is that any different than what he was doing in Phantasm or in Kenny and Company and all of that?
I totally agree. When I saw that Don Coscarelli was attached at one point, that to me was, again, Dan Attias is fine, but Don Coscarelli would have brought something really interesting to this. A real injection of his own style that's so obvious and apparent. Even in something like Bubba Hotep, a movie that I have a lot of problems with, but still enjoy, he injects a fair amount of style into his adaptation of that short story. I guess that's more of a novella?
Yeah, novella.
Yeah. But I like what Don Coscarelli does and the things that he does. And I really would like to see what that would look like, because I think it would be a little bit more, like you said, kind of fantastical reality. Not like a full-on fairy tale, but, more like the book that Stephen King wrote this year that I'm reading right now. So there's that.
I'm reading fairy tale as well. Enough.
It's pretty good, but
it is. I enjoy it.
It's heightened reality. Like it's fantastical reality. Oh, this is a world with fairy tale. Like, I would have appreciated that a little bit more than Everett McGill's a werewolf, because
that's something that the movie just kind of completely glosses over. Yep. Now, to be fair, the novella also kind of glosses it over. There's a brief line about him picking some flowers that dissolved in his hands, and then that's about it.
And he knew then that he was cursed.
Yep.
At least they have the conversation, the three of them in this movie, where they're like, well, I don't think he even knows. Like, they at least address it. I don't even think it's a lantern hanging thing. I think they, because they have to have the conversation like, well, it isn't necessarily a full moon. Well, this werewolf doesn't necessarily follow the rules from Universal Monsters. By the way, Chris, I'm going to answer your addendum now, which I failed to at the top of the show. Of the original Universal Monsters, mine is 100% the Gill Man, the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Fine choice.
Good choice.
I can't get enough of that fellow.
Another creature that creature for the Black Lagoon least adapted of all of them.
Yeah, they keep trying to. They keep threatening to. At one point, John Carpenter was going to make one, but no, they still haven't gotten around to him yet.
Unless you count The Shape of Water, was an unofficial adaptation of it, and hey, won the Academy Award.
But yeah, that was the Creature Walks Amongst Us remake.
I mean, yeah.
And speaking of diminishing returns with the sequel, that poor Gill Man.
I know, the poor guy. But that first one, and his image is just so powerful. Like,
I guess my other question in all of this, this being a Stephen King novella, this being a Stephen King property, how does the ending for this actually work? Oh, wait, because it's a novella. Never mind. That's why.
Very suddenly, just like in the film,
Right, yeah.
Werewolf attacks, they shoot it with a silver bullet.
Yeah.
That's it.
Bing, bang, boom, baby. What else do you need? Except now we've got a dead, naked priest in our house that we shot to death. How are we going to explain this?
He was a werewolf.
The only real difference between the conclusion in the novella and the conclusion of the movie is that the parents were home. And so they came downstairs to be like, what the hell?
More witnesses, basically, is the only change.
Well, and it makes sense that Everett McGill would play a werewolf in this movie because 2 years later? Yeah, 2 years later, he's in the Fox original series Werewolf, playing a boxer who fights a werewolf by punching it to death.
Oh, wow. I've got to tune into that
No,
one.
you don't. You really don't. It
is Everett McGill, right? And he is punching a werewolf?
Yeah, he's like boxing with a werewolf.
Why would you try to convince me not to watch this?
Because that show's werewolf effect is worse than this one.
I watched that show. I remember it,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But I do not recall Everett McGill boxing a werewolf, and now I really need to see it.
Yeah, I think his character is like Sweet Joe Williams or something. It's like the most stereotypical boxer name too. It's something that's just like it's Sweet Jake Williams is his character's name. And the episode of Werewolf titled Blood on the Tracks, the 15th episode of the first season. And thank God there was only one season to that fucking show. Yikes.
That's still a show that I really want to watch. I missed it during its initial run, and there was supposed to be a Blu-ray release of it at one point from Scream Factory. Then the rights fell through, so it exists in this weird sort of legal limbo. I think you can import a French version, but
if you want to hear me and Jess Byard talk about it for 15 episodes or whatever it was, we covered the entire show on the one season show. That's
very nice.
Not really. You like the Incredible Hulk? It's like that, but worse, like way worse. And Chuck Connors is in it for 3 episodes, even though they advertise him throughout the show. So,
well, of course.
Yeah. Why not?
I just remember a lot of actors baring their teeth.
Yeah. And a lot of like shots of like yellow eyes. Yeah. Lots of really crummy yellow contacts. And a lot of like industrial park areas too that are abandoned with trash cans that are on fire. That's the werewolf setting du jour, as they would say.
Well, speaking of grizzled character actors, we neglected to mention that Silver Bullet also has Lawrence Tierney in it. The Thing, motherfucker, looks just like the Thing.
Yeah,
he's fantastic.
I love Lawrence Tierney.
Such gravity all of a sudden in this scene. Suddenly, all the petty little fights that these guys are picking with each other, there's a real contender in the ring.
It's one of those things where it's such a movie trope that there's the bartender that breaks up the fights, and there's the thing, and most of the time you're wondering, well, how does he manage to do that? But when Lawrence Tierney is tending bar and pulls out a gigantic bat that he's carved Peacemaker into, yeah, you buy that.
Everybody sit down now.
Yeah, we're done.
But that's why it takes Everett McGill as a werewolf to beat the shit out of him to death.
That's true, and the only reason I think they had Peacemaker carved into the bat is they may have been attempting a biblical joke of "Blessed be the peacemakers," as the werewolf then proceeds to kill people with the bat that says "Peacemaker," and he's a reverend.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That might be a Stephen King special right there.
That feels like a Stephen King special.
Can we talk about the amount of just eye-rolling Stephen King vigilante justice versus religion nonsense that would be re-echoed in such things as The Mist?
Oh yeah,
well, he just loves. You could see him just sitting at the typewriter, just like, and then the pastor says, and it's like, oh God, Stephen, why are we doing this again? To
his credit, there's no greasers in this movie.
Yeah, right. And no, what are they? Switchblades either.
Yeah.
No, and there's no sort of mentally unstable person who is also somehow divine.
Or an alien,
right? There's no jive talking African American character here.
Yeah, it doesn't fall into the Stephen King traps as much as I was expecting it to. See, that was the issue. When I saw his name on it, I was like, oh God, it's going to do all the Stephen King things. You know, I haven't finished Fairy Tale yet, but I'm waiting for it to end terribly. I mean, that's the joke. I mean, when you're hanging a lantern on it in It Chapter 2, like, we know now, dude. We get it.
But have you seen Maximum Overdrive?
Yes, I have. A movie created by cocaine.
Oh, yes.
Didn't the cinematographer lose his eye while filming that? Like,
I heard that story.
Ignominious thing.
Yeah. There was like some shot that they were doing. Mark Begley and I covered it earlier this year. Some shot that they had, and Stephen King and them didn't prepare correctly, and the cinematographer like went blind in one eye.
A lawnmower ran over a chunk of wood that was like a chalk for one of the camera things, and it shot up into his eye
because they didn't want to not use the lawnmower blade for whatever reason.
Yeah, and
I got to make it real, man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
real, man.
real.
Yeah.
Now it's real. Yeah. What do you say on that day on set? Well, great. I hope it was worth it for the fucking semi-truck movie.
And to his credit, after that, he decided to never direct again. Unlike Landis, who killed 3 people and just kept on trucking.
That's true. That boy, you know what they say. I legally am not responsible. I was found not liable in a court of law. I care not what the public opinion has to say about such things.
Wow.
God. Yeah, well, you know what they say.
That's the world we live in, baby.
I know. It really is. It really is. But it's also the world we live in where they said to Gary Busey on this movie, you know, your ad-libbing is just funnier than the script, so just do that.
Yep.
And thank God.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, I mentioned that at the top, that line, Jesus Palomino.
I wrote that thing down. It was so weird.
Yeah, well, it's appeared in a number of films. It appears in the film Used Cars. It appears in 1941, and here, and the common thread there is John Milius, who used to just say that, and people would write it down like as character things, but like as a little tribute to him. So, and Gary Busey, of course, was in Big Wednesday, directed by John Milius. So there's no question that that's not a Milius thing.
So I'm just imagining that somewhere in the DNA of Uncle Red, there's a little bit of Milius. But then again, if there was, he would have had way more guns.
Way more guns. Well, he did know exactly where to go and the right gunsmith to make him a silver bullet. So if that ain't Milius, and nothing is.
Very true.
And you were on the Conan the Barbarian episode, the first episode of the Projection Booth I listened to, which was written by
John Milius.
Hey, it's all coming at Milius.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Yes, all roads lead to John Milius.
You know, for as much time as Gary Busey does get, I do wish we had gotten more Everett McGill, because there's not enough Everett McGill in anything that he's in, ever.
True.
Even in something like Under Siege 2, where he's effectively like one of the 3 best parts of that movie. There's not enough Everett McGill.
I think that's part of the reason that he's so effective as an actor, is that they know how to, people know how to use him effectively, and that used sparingly, I think that he works out. And one thing that this film does have is that there is that marked shift in his portrayal. That up until the point that before he loses his eye, he seems like a decent enough guy. You know, when he's talking to his congregation, he feels like he feels for them. And then when the audience is caught up that, oh no, he's the werewolf, that's where they switch and he becomes super sinister. And he's good in both capacities. You know, this is the guy that can play both Big Ed and whatever his character's name was, in the gimp suit and the people under the stairs. You know.
What is the who in the remake of Dune? Who plays Stilgar?
That was Javier Bardem, I believe.
Fuck him.
Okay. That's a questionable thing to say, but all right.
Yeah. I was going to say, fuck Denis Villeneuve.
No,
Javier Bardem.
Listen, I'm just making a point of how awesome Everett McGill is. I have one Everett McGill story. I was a projectionist at a movie theater in Santa Monica, and he came in with Wendy Roby.
Oh,
I guess they were filming People Under the Stairs at the time, and when he walked in, I said, is there worm sign? And he said, the likes of which God has never seen, and then clapped his hand on my shoulder. And I was like, oh, so Everett McGill, top notch for me forever.
Love him.
Oh my God. Have you never told that story before?
I don't know. You and I have not yet really talked to Dune, my friend.
That's true. What is there to say other than apparently David Lynch wants another crack at it? So give the man what he wants.
What do you mean? Is that the thing? Or is it just internet?
No, that's what David Lynch said. He was like, I would like to go back and do it again or fix it or something.
Oh, but is he just going to fix the film or is he going to make a new?
Did they let Zack Snyder do some bullshit with Justice League?
True.
David Lynch, give Lynch a try. You might like it.
I'm curious to see what it would end up looking like now.
Yeah, he needs to embrace the television cut. Don't be a coward, Lynch.
Yeah.
3 hours of Dune. Let's watch this.
For real. I mean, all those, the Spice Diver edition and all those fan edits are where it's at, man. And that's just like that TV version, but amped up on more steroids. My God. Yeah. Can we talk about Terry O'Quinn for a minute, who's not in this movie nearly enough? And
not in anything nearly enough.
Well, God, right? Dear Lord in heaven. Terry O'Quinn is one of those actors. Anytime I see him in something, I always just think to myself, like, I'm sorry you were in Lost, and that's what most people know you from. Because you're such a good actor in every, like, Stepfather, for fuck's sake. I mean, that's
there's
right.
a certain generation that we know Terry O'Quinn from Stepfather. Everybody else knows him from Lost. Right. Which I've never seen Lost, so by default, it's just Stepfather.
I had seen Stepfather, but like it didn't really make an impression on me. My impression of Terry O'Quinn comes from the TV series Millennium.
Okay,
where Peter Watts, our entry into the Millennium group, and he's so fucking good in it. He always radiates decency, even when he's being a villain. I don't know how that's possible, but that's what I love about Terry O'Quinn.
Yeah.
He was in the X-Files 2 times before Millennium because he was on the show and then he was in the movie.
In the movie, yeah.
My Terry O'Quinn entry was Howard Hughes in The Rocketeer.
Actually, thinking back, that would have been mine as well.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I just think of him in that scene with, the Rocketeer running is like, damn, tell him the thing can fly. Like, oh my God, like fucking Terry O'Quinn again, like you mentioned, Father Malone. I've seen him in more things where he's essentially a villain or a villain lackey than a hero. And even in the things where he's a bad guy, like I'm on board with whatever he's doing. Even when he's a villain in the beginning of that X-Files movie. And I'm like, whatever. I'd like to see more of whatever you're doing, even though you're actively trying to kill everybody.
Was he not Agent Michaud?
Yeah, Darius Michaud sits in front of the bomb and doesn't defuse it. He just sits there and lets him blow him up. It's such a good scene. It's such a great way to start a movie where like Waco had happened like a couple months earlier or something to that effect.
It was a little eerie, actually.
Yeah, it's great. Or I guess that was the Oklahoma City bombing that was eerily reminiscent of, not Waco. But yeah, Terry O'Quinn's great in this. I just, again, like when you're the cop character in a movie like this, you kind of know where this is headed.
Oh, he's all kinds of doomed.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Go investigate the werewolf. Yeah, well, we'll see you. We'll see you later, Terry O'Quinn. Outside of the issues with some of the effects, like you guys have kind of already touched on a little bit, it does have a fair amount of style to it. Mm-hmm. It lives in an interesting place, kind of in my mind, where it does kind of have the scarier moments, the kind of the creepier moments, the moments that are filling you with some level of tension. But then it really has this interesting kind of family dynamic at the center. I mean, there's that scene where they're sitting at the picnic. They're kind of having this like picnic together. And Gary Busey, it's the Palomino scene. And Gary Busey's just going on and on and on. And it just, I know this sounds terrible, but I kind of wish there just wasn't a werewolf in this movie. And it was just kind of them doing whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. That again, in the hands of some filmmakers, they would have been able to more deftly play those scenes off of each other, you know, to provide a greater contrast to the gore and all these things. And I don't think that this film quite is able to pull off that dynamic. In isolation, they're good scenes. It's only when you start comparing them to each other and viewing the film as a whole where you get these kind of tonal inconsistencies.
And then you have a child riding a motorcycle wheelchair, which is ostensibly the most dangerous thing in this entire movie, not including the werewolf.
I can tell I'm getting old because he's going down the street and I'm thinking, why is he not wearing a helmet?
I had the exact same thought.
That was the most dangerous thing in this entire movie. Was just this kid in this like totally not street legal, but they're claiming it's street legal gas-powered motorcycle wheelchair.
I love that Gary Busey says, you know, you can't let your mother know just how fast it goes. Look at the thing. It's a rocket. It's named the Silver Bullet. Clearly, it's going to go very fast on a highway.
Even the fact that he's using it as his getting around outside wheelchair, it's still a diesel-powered engine on it that's releasing all of this exhaust. I mean, there's no way he can take it inside, right?
Isn't this thing insanely loud? Like they're driving around and he's just, we hear him coming from 10 miles away as he putters down the street on his fucking diesel wheelchair.
Make sure you sneak out in the middle of the night to set these fireworks off.
Yeah.
Marty.
Well, that was the thing. There are some moments in this movie that made me laugh out loud, and I know they're not intentional. And I know it's from the short story, the letter that Marty writes.
Yep, kill yourself.
Oh my fucking God. It's not kill yourself. It's, I know who you are. I know what you are. Why don't you just kill yourself?
Yep. Good. And that is right out of the novella. He sends a series of letters and eventually he just starts signing his name to them because he wants to lure the werewolf to him.
Yeah.
He signs them, yours truly, Marty.
The poison pen letter.
Yeah.
You know, I just want to say that referring back to the Gary Busey character, Uncle Red, the performance is great overall, but when the kids need an adult to believe them, and he does, like that whole dynamic in the film, like just shines for me. That feeling as a kid where no one will believe you about something is really real. And this film taps into that. And this is, you know, Dan Attias, he makes all of these scenes fantastic with the film. I'm just echoing what you said, El Goro. Like it needed a horror guy to like do the horror stuff because he's not that guy. Some of the sequences that are tense are very good. That scene on the bridge with Everett McGill and him. In fact, the whole lead up to that where Everett McGill is hunting him down with his Chevy Malibu. Like I thought that scene is actually really harrowing. But the gore stuff, he's clearly out of his depth. Like I don't know how they didn't just have somebody come in and shoot that stuff and drop it in later. Other than Dino didn't want to spend any more money.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, there's such this weird disconnect. It really feels like two movies. And I wanted to make the joke early on, and I'll make it now. It honestly feels like a very expensive episode of The Twilight Zone or of Tales from the Crypt. Like that, the kind of the level of complexity to the story, that of which there is not very much complexity to the story, feels very, and it feels tonally like a Tales from the Crypt or an EC comic story.
Yeah. And again, it from the filmmaking standpoint, it feels like his heart was in the family stuff. His heart was in the children's stuff. And the rest of the stuff was just more, well, I have to do these scenes but they didn't have that same kind of care and craft.
Which is crazy because those are the werewolf scenes in your werewolf movie.
I know.
What the fuck is going on here? Like, I just don't want to do the werewolf stuff. Dan, it's a werewolf movie.
But you run into that with some filmmakers, especially in the horror genre. It's like, well, I don't really consider this a horror film. This is a family drama.
Fucking
door.
Hey, I like A24 movies, don't you?
Everything is a horror movie until it becomes successful, and then suddenly it's a thriller, right?
Yeah, as much as I enjoy Ari Aster's films, at a certain point I need to take him aside and say, bro, you're making horror movies. Own it.
No. A24 makes heightened reality thrillers.
Yeah,
that are filled with they're filled with tension. Okay, heightened reality thrillers full of tension and blood. And sometimes
Slow burn, my friend.
Ty West, thank you for entering the chat. Ty West has entered the chat.
You bag on him a lot. I like those early.
I don't mind Ty West. I
enjoyed X. I haven't seen Pearl yet, but I enjoyed X.
The one that I bag on is the guy who directed Blair Witch. Is that Gareth?
Joe Simon or something?
Oh, Adam Wingard.
Oh, yes, Adam Wingard and I have issues.
Yeah, Adam Wingard is the one that I have issues with as well.
No, I did like The Guest. The Guest was a good film, but yeah.
That's because it's more of a thriller and not a horror movie.
Well, also the synth soundtrack helped.
That too. Also, it not being a secret Blair Witch sequel also helped.
Also, the fact that he didn't put the camera in the hands of somebody with some kind of palsy, so it was shaking all over the place. You know, I'm looking at you, a horrible way to die.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Right. Apparently, that was
good.
And when we talk about movies like this on the show, at least we have more recently than not, this tonally inconsistent movies. And I wonder if I rewatch it, if I'll enjoy it more the second time, because now I know it's tonally inconsistent. I tend to notice that with tonally inconsistent movies. You know, I watched this 2 times, but I think a third or a fourth viewing would help really kind of overcome the tonal inconsistencies of the movie. Because honestly, if you read Roger Ebert's review, which I think is, I know Father Malone's making his finger arches because of our love.
I am hinting my finger. So the mention of the man. Yes,
we love him. He went as far as to say that he felt like this movie was a parody of the Stephen King novella.
Sure. I wouldn't go that far.
Me either. The design of the werewolf's not that bad. It's not like it had giant Tex Avery cartoon eyes sticking out of its head or something.
But what in the actual story, what in the actual screenplay feels like a parody of the novella or werewolf movies in general? I didn't see it as a parody at all.
I mean, there's some funny scenes. That's what I was saying. Like the scene where the werewolf beats the guy with the baseball bat. The scene in the church is like oddly funny in a weird way. Everett McGill's werewolf nightmare.
But, that is something right out of the novella. But I actually enjoyed that sequence, even in terms of the special effects, because it had that sort of surrealistic nightmare logic to it. And the way it was filmed, it was deliberately over the top because it was a dream sequence. I think that they do play the werewolf stuff pretty straight in this film, and functionally it works well as a werewolf narrative. It just falls down in the presentation of a werewolf and the balancing of some of the elements. Again, I think that this is a good film, and I readily admit if I had been like Father Malone and seen this when I was 12, it would have been my favorite movie ever. I think this movie plays very well to that young audience. And to me, there's nothing too terribly objectionable that I wouldn't show it to a 12-year-old. But then again, I'm a little bit more on the Uncle Red side of things than some people.
Yeah,
I've never been drinking out of a bottle of Wild Turkey while hanging out with my niece and nephew.
Speaking of questionable things in this movie, just slugging Wild Turkey, and then that was a bit rough. I thought
that was a choice.
Yeah, Uncle Red might have a problem.
There you go.
Chris, I just wanted to mention, the thing about the repeat viewings of this movie, to me, why it works is because everything else really works in the movie. And when you pay less attention, which is a bit much to ask from a viewer, the movie works. Like I've seen this movie probably once a year for, 30 years now. Like I'm constantly showing it to people who haven't seen it. So
just ignore the fact that it's a werewolf movie.
Listen, ignore the shitty effects, just go with the rest of the flick.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's my point. Like I am right there with the movie. I enjoyed the parts of the movie that aren't the werewolf stuff. Everything but the werewolf stuff is really fun. And there are a couple werewolf things that are funny in spite of how bad the effects are. Like you mentioned, El Goro, that the dream logic in the Everett McGill's Werewolf Nightmare, which is totally the name of a band, if somebody hasn't taken it yet. Those effects in that scene are fantastic. And that's like the one of two times in the movie the werewolf effects just kind of work because they're mid-transformation, so we don't see the hilarious final product. And people, they all look like they're in pain and everybody's emoting just the right amount. Everybody's getting into it and really selling it.
There's a lady who's really crazily playing the organ.
Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's like an animatronic.
Yeah. It's Stephen King in the 80s doing Stephen King stuff. And I'm glad he rewrote this himself because I think even more would have gotten lost in translation if someone else had adapted it. But, if someone else had adapted it, I don't think it would have changed anything. I think if you're going to still have Carlo Rambaldi doing the effects and Stephen King consulting on the effects and Dan Attias directing it, I don't think anything changes no matter what the script is. I think the effects are stuck the way they are unless you fire Carlo Rambaldi, which that was never in the cards, clearly, because you're not going to fire the guy who did E.T. and the alien head effect and, God knows how many other things you could mention that I have forgotten, which there are plenty of them.
Yeah, I mean, potentially if there was a more visually effects-minded director, he could have gotten involved in the process to create something that would have been worked better on the screen for what they may have going for. And again, some of the design of it may have been in service to the whole dropping of the element of the werewolf talking. Those slightly more human features could have been because he needed it to be able to talk. But if they had just redesigned the head to make it a little bit more like the snarling heads from The Howling, I think most of my issues with the werewolf would have gone out of it. Yeah, the body would have still looked weird, but you just kind of have to roll with that. It's kind of hard to pull off a werewolf unless you go full animatronic with it.
Right. And like you mentioned at the top of this, I mean, if you take the werewolf story and that's the sandwich you want to go and eat, that's a pretty big sandwich to try and eat. Like, it's just, of all the Universal monsters to adapt, that would be the one I would stay as far away from as humanly possible. Like,
I live in hope that there will be another great werewolf story, but it's been quite a few years since we had a really legitimately great one. Dog Soldiers comes to mind.
Oh, Dog Soldiers, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Guillermo del Toro, was it Guillermo? No, it was Benicio del Toro.
Yeah, the Wolfman.
I will kill all of you. That was great.
That was a good one.
That was great.
In terms of great ones, Dog Soldiers is really the only one that comes to mind. And there's some other ones that have been in there that I've enjoyed for certain extenses. Late Phases for a independent, more minded one. The werewolf design in that looked kind of sketchy.
Of course, as white men, we wouldn't bring up Ginger Snaps, right?
I enjoyed Ginger Snaps. Ginger Snaps was quite good.
Ginger Snaps is fun. I have issues with the pacing of that movie. But I think I actually, if it's I would agree. Dog Soldiers and Ginger Snaps are probably like right there. Well, and obviously Underworld, but
oh well, goes without saying.
Right, and Twilight, that as well. Obviously, Werewolves and Men.
And with that,
I mean, that's the thing. We could name all the werewolf stuff that's come out in the last 20 years.
An embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, was it? Well, who were they going to get to play the werewolf in the quickly abandoned Dark?
Wasn't that going to be
universe?
Wasn't that going to be Ryan Gosling?
Oh my god, that's just what I wanted.
Or actually, no, I think he's attached to it. That one still might be in development.
Oh,
well, I'll go see that.
I heard something about Ryan Gosling in a werewolf story.
Does he have a shirt off at any point?
Maybe I'm just dreaming it.
Well, we've got Werewolf by Night now.
That's true. And actually, Werewolf by Night was very enjoyable.
Yeah, and the design was good. Like, it's a Wolfman. That's what I'm looking for. The Wolfman. I want Oliver Reed. That's, if you're giving me a Wolfman, give me that.
Yeah, I could have used a little bit more fur in the face. Again, get it closer to that Oliver Reed and also the Benicio del Toro look. If we're going Wolfman, make him a little bit furrier. But still, the Werewolf by Night was very enjoyable.
I'm hoping that the design will evolve the more we see of him.
And it was Marvel taking a chance for once. What's that like? Do that more often, because then we get to see things that aren't just Brie Larson doing the same thing a million times, or someone else in a CGI suit. It was nice to see something horror in the Marvel universe, like just straight up horror. Yeah, about time. About 10 years, but I'd say like 7 years too late. Like they had an opportunity very early on to go some interesting directions, and they
were terrified to do so, obviously. But you know, Multiverse of Madness had a lead character animating his own corpse with a cape made of demons. So we're going in the right direction with Marvel.
Agreed. But yeah, it's always interesting to me to see the way the Universal monsters have been treated since kind of the important stories that everybody kind of holds up on the top of the pedestal as the original ones. I think for me, I think it still has to be American Werewolf in London for the werewolf story, right?
I would say so. Yeah.
Speaking of John Landis.
Yeah.
Damn it. I mean, whatever. It's whatever. I didn't kill him. He did. But he didn't even kill him. Again,
oh my God.
Legally, he's not. Legally, he's absolved. It's unfortunately, it's hard now because everybody brings it up. Yeah, I'm not the one bringing it up. El Goro's not even the one bringing it up. You
bring it up every time we mention.
It's hard not to.
Okay, fine, but he did some fine work, man.
He did.
Yeah, and so the least we can do is we just bring it up. We can still
get it out of the way.
Yeah, it's like, look, you didn't have any jail time. The least you could do is occasionally be reminded that you were responsible for.
Okay, I agree with that.
Right,
like, is that the sum total of the man? Like,
no, that and Max Landis.
Every time we mention his name.
Would you rather I bring up Max Landis instead?
No. Oh boy. Oh my God. Okay. Listen, even I have limits with the Landis family.
Talk about a guy who nosedived really, really quick.
Twilight Zone movie or Max Landis? Don't bring up Max Landis. Bring up the other one as much as you like.
I'll talk about the whole case.
Yeah. But again, like I said, I have no problem readily admitting American Werewolf in London is my favorite werewolf movie. And I think just like one of my favorite movies. I think it's a damn near perfect movie.
Yeah. It's hard to go against that. And in terms of favorite werewolf movies, yeah, it's definitely up there for me as well.
What are some other ones? Yeah, okay. So what about you, El Goro? Would it be your number one, or is there something else that's even better?
If pressed, it would probably be my number one. Very close second would be The Howling tied with the original Wolfman.
Not The Howling 3?
No, marsupials?
That's the good one.
That's a movie.
It is a movie that you can watch somewhere on the internet. Whether or not you should is a different story.
Oh no, I own the Blu-ray. So
oh man.
With commentary, I hope.
I don't know.
And was it released by Scream Factory? Yes or no?
No, I believe that one was an import. Because I actually own all but one of the Howlings in some sort of physical format. There was one that only was put out on VHS, to the best of my knowledge.
So I guess the other question I have, again, I've read a fair amount of Stephen King. El Goro, clearly you're a reader of Stephen King. Father Malone, I know you're a reader of Stephen King as well. Is this the only straight werewolf story Stephen King has done?
With the exception of them showing up in some capacity in the Dark Tower, I believe so.
Yeah, I can't think of another one, honestly.
So where does that place it then? Because I guess actually, hold on. To be fair, we mentioned It, and I think the Wolfman shows up at It.
That's true.
Right.
Or the teenage werewolf did.
Right. Because he's wearing in the original It movie, he's wearing the Letterman jacket.
Mm-hmm.
So with this being the only Stephen King approach to a werewolf story, source material movie, pretty good, right? I think overall.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm a fan. I'm a big fan of the cycle of the werewolf novella. It is super short. You can knock it out in a day, and it just works in terms of classical werewolf narrative. It's once a month the Wolfman attacks, and it is savage in some of those early chapters where it's basically just set up a victim. The victim dies. And that kind of utility of storytelling, for all people will comment negatively about the excesses of Stephen King, his endings, his sprawling lengths. The guy is very, very good at short fiction. And Cycle of the Werewolf is an example of that. Just again, the utility of storytelling and how much horror he can inject in very few words. It maintains that format, and I think it works very, very well. And if you were to do a new adaptation of it, One of the ways that I was thinking about kind of different approaches to it, I wouldn't even do it as a film. I would actually do it as for a project like Shudder, where you would every month you would release a new short and you would just adapt that month. And then you would just the next month, the next chapter in Cycle of the Werewolf would come out. I mean, that would work quite well. In terms of doing it to a film, you have to change the format. You can't stretch the action out over a year and expect it to work very well as a film. But in another format, I think it could still work quite well.
In the pantheon of werewolf stories, I don't think Stephen King needed to revisit it at all. I like the characters do pop up, just as a sort of an iconic kind of character, but as his only werewolf tale, I think it ranks up there. And what I was trying to echo El Goro is his novels can be really good and they can be really just awful, but I've never had issue with any of his short fiction. Like when he exercises economy, he does it better than anybody. And I like that his one vampire thing didn't sprawl out to the megalith levels of page numbers that he ended up pouring out at us. So anyway, to answer your question, I think it's a fucking great werewolf novel, and certainly he needn't have said anything else about it.
Well, and again, like we've mentioned about Stephen King's short story work, I mean, I always echo that as well. It's Stephen King's short stories. I mean, that's why Dollar Babies are so popular. Mm-hmm. It's because his short stories are so well done. Father Malone and I, a lifetime ago is what it feels like now. I don't think we've ever talked about it on a podcast. We had sent them the money and gotten it. And
we optioned.
We optioned a Dollar Baby and everything, the two of us.
Which was it?
It was a Tale of Laundry. It was what's it called? Milkman Part 2.
Yeah, Milkman Part 2.
From I believe Night Shift.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's a weird one, and was going to be a lot of fun, we thought, and then the whole world shut down, and then these things happen.
Things happen.
Yeah, and then you're essentially locked in your house for 2 years. So
yeah, so.
Yeah,
it didn't really come to fruition, but man, we had the gumption at one point.
We did. But it's just a testament to the quality of Stephen King's writing, like you both have already said, that it's not just his long form narratives, it's his short stories that people are clamoring for. I wouldn't be shocked if this gets readapted somehow in some form or fashion, right? I mean, again, Stephen King, most adapted author of all time. That's never gonna change as long as the guy keeps writing. The fairy tales are already optioned to be adapted by Paul Greengrass. Book's been out for fucking 4 months.
I'm sure at a certain point, as soon as he submits it to the editor, they immediately sell the adaptation rights.
Right? Like, why wouldn't you? You put Stephen King's name on it, and people are already clamoring for it. Even with what's the name of that TV show that just existed for a while?
Oh, the Castle Rock.
Castle Rock.
Yeah. That was not great.
Yeah, it just kind of existed. People watched it, and then,
I like that second season, the Annie Wilkes origin story.
Oh, okay. I only made it like an episode into that, and I kind of lost interest.
Oh, no, it ends up being really good.
All right.
And this town, Tarker's Mills, in Cycle of the Werewolf and then Silver Bullet, it shares a cemetery with Salem's Lot, Harmony Hill.
Yeah.
It's right up against Derry, and not too far from the Rock itself.
Everything's connected in the world of Mr. King.
He was world building before anybody.
He really was. Yeah, he really was. And again, that for me is why I like and have issues with Stephen King, is because he is at times perfectly narrow, but at times overly expansive to the point where he just goes everywhere and yet nowhere at the same time. It's like you're just spinning in a circle. Like that's what a lot of it felt like, was just him spinning in a circle going, look at all this crazy stuff. And it's like, yeah, all right, like a turtle, but what the fuck? like he made it make sense in the story, but yes.
You know who has the easiest job in the world? Stephen King's editor.
Right.
True. Just make sure the punctuation is correct and then send it along.
Pretty much. Anything else you guys want to talk about with Cycle of the Werewolf / Silver Bullet?
Nah, I think I've said everything set out to say. Like I said, it's not a terrible film. It's actually a very enjoyable film. By no means would I consider it a great one, but it's still one that I do not begrudge revisiting and still do derive a lot of enjoyment out of. Which again is not everything I could, not something I could say about the majority of werewolf films out there.
I do have one other thing to say, which is didn't mention this guy. I don't know his name, and as a Romero fan, I'm deficient in not knowing. But the sort of lousy father, the girl that likes Marty, who the werewolf kills. You know, he's watching. Watching wrestling at one point. Oh, my parts! He was Wooly in Dawn of the Dead, the one who goes apeshit and starts blasting people with a shotgun at the beginning of that.
Really?
Oh yeah. And he's despicable there, and he's despicable here. He has a brief moment in Romero's film Night Riders, and he's despicable there too.
And then the werewolf in this movie impales him. So
yep,
there you go. Final thoughts on Silver Bullet, Father Malone.
I love the movie. I don't think of it as a werewolf movie sometimes. I just think of it as a Stephen King horror movie about Uncle Red and his nephew and niece and them trying to get together,
the scariest story of them all.
And Everett McGill prowling around like, being the most menacing human being on the planet. So I don't know. I think it's worth a look. I think it's worth your time, listeners.
Yeah, no, I would agree. As you know, out of the three of us, the one who had not seen it going into the episode, I enjoyed it about as much as I could. Again, like you both have already said, Stephen King, short story. He adapted his own work, so it's already setting itself up for success. Yeah, there are some problems, namely, the thing a lot of people were here for. But, you can't win them all. You can't win all of them, and you can't even win some of them. But in this case, they won, I would say 75% of it. It's, and frankly, in this day and age, you just got to entertain me 2 out of the 3 times. You don't have to nail it completely. Most things don't even nail it 1/3 of the time. So if you're nailing it 2/3 of the time, I'm cool with it. So I enjoyed this, and what's funny for me is, we talk about Stephen King adaptations, and this is not one that always gets mentioned. And that feels like the biggest shame of all, frankly. The fact that I hadn't heard somebody say Stephen King Silver Bullet at any point in my life until I watched it is fucking wild to me.
Sorry.
That is strange that that never made it into you, that you had obviously heard of Silver Bullet, but didn't realize the Stephen King connection to it.
Yeah. Again, just, hey, the more you know, as they would say. So on that note, we'll take a break and we'll play a preview for next week's Kulturecast.
30 years ago, Roger Corman began to explore the dark side of the American psyche. With movies like The Undead, The Pit and the Pendulum, and the original Little Shop of Horrors. Now, he feels the world is ready for the greatest horror story ever told, as it's never been told before. Frankenstein, Unbound, starring John Hurt, Raul Julia, and Bridget Fonda, directed by Roger Corman.
So out of the next Kulturecast, we're going to be taking a look at a film that is not involved with Stephen King at all. We're going to be talking about Roger Corman's Frankenstein Unbound.
I love that movie.
I have never seen it, but I'm excited to watch it because it has Raul Julia in it. And that's enough for me. Until then, where can people find you, El Goro?
If you want to check me out, I do a weekly film podcast called the Talk Without Rhythm podcast. You can find it basically wherever you find podcasts. Just do a search for Talk Without Rhythm. You will find it. Gimmick of the show, every episode I pick 2 films that are somewhat tied together by a theme, and I talk about them. Been doing it for a while.
Fucking crazy, dude. I was doing the 2 movie thing early on, and I don't know how you can sustain it.
I don't know. I'm coming up on my 13th year, and somehow it's just become part of life.
Wow.
Mental.
Good. 2 movies a week for 13 years?
Yeah, sometimes 3.
I mean, I record a lot too, but 2 movies of recording that was just a lot for me. That's just, whew, thank God.
I never said
you,
I was a sane man.
Well,
I don't envy you.
I was saying,
I admire you, but I don't envy you.
When Father Malone and I are taken aback by your workload, that's a problem, man. Good Lord. On that note, Father Malone, where can people find the immense amount of work that you put into things?
I would say go over to weirdingwaymedia.com. I've got a lot of things on there now, including, you mentioned up at the top, Astounding Tales of the Public Domain. It's a golden age of science fiction authors, enhanced audio performances of those. You can also hear me on Midnight Viewing, the Night Gallery podcast, which I do with Chris, and the aforementioned Mike White, our man in Detroit. Weirding Way Media.
And I don't even have to plug it. You already did. So I'll plug Kulturecast.com, patreon.com/Kulturecast, all the places you can go if you want to donate financially. But, like, rate, and review wherever you get the show. I'm not going to plug social media because what is there to say at this point that isn't already being said by people much smarter than me with a lot more time on their hands to roast shit like social media? So social media if you want to, but you don't have to. Father Malone, El Goro, thank you both so much for joining me. Obviously, this was a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me on.
And thank you as well.
And we'll catch you on the next episode.